Okay, today we're going to talk about the RH140E by Infasco. This is an Italian-made spin-pull-spin rivet nut tool. And when you buy the tool, it comes in a nice blow-molded case. It also comes with a variety of different mandrels. It comes with an oil-filling tube, a stroke adjustment key, and a hex key to remove the oil plug. Alright, now we're going to talk about the basic operation of the RH140E. It's quite simple. To operate the tool, there are two triggers. The top trigger collapses the riv nut, and the bottom trigger reverses it out. Alright, next there's a big warning here. When you install the riv nut on the mandrel, always make sure you know what the tool stroke is set for before you install it in any material thickness. Alright, next on our RH140E we're going to talk about the proper anvil position. Before we make any adjustments to the tool, the first thing I want to do is I want to come in and disconnect my air pressure. And as I do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to notice the length of the mandrel compared to the anvil. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to thread my riv nut down onto the mandrel. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the mandrel and the open end of the riv nut to be flush so that I get maximum thread engagement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this anvil jam nut and move the anvil out to meet the head of the open end riv nut, and then go in and tighten my anvil jam nut down. And that's the proper position for an open end riv nut. Now when we set the anvil position for a closed end riv nut, it's very similar to an open end riv nut with a few differences. I'm going to thread the riv nut on to the mandrel until it bottoms out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and loosen my anvil jam nut, and then I'm going to move the anvil out to meet the head of the closed end riv nut. Now before I secure my anvil jam nut down, what I want to do is I want to turn my closed end riv nut 1.5 turns to make sure that the mandrel is no longer bottomed out in the riv nut. And I'm going to go ahead and move my anvil out to meet the head of that riv nut, and then go back down and tighten my anvil jam nut, just like so. Alright, next on our RH140E we're going to talk about the proper stroke. And basically the stroke adjustment for this particular tool is done on the nose piece. There's a silver adjusting ring that's here. And basically there's also a plus and a minus sign. So to set the stroke correctly, we're going to turn our silver adjusting ring in the direction we want to adjust the stroke. If we have thin material, we move the silver ring in the plus direction, and for thicker material we want less stroke, so we move that silver ring into the minus direction. Okay, so when we calculate our stroke, the first thing we need to know is the riv nut part number, and that can be found in the catalog or on the bag. You can also identify the riv nut by the head marking on the riv nut itself. Typically there's a manufacturer's mark, and then there's also a radial mark. If it's blank, it's the first grip. If there's one radial mark, it's the second grip. If it's two radial marks, it's the third grip, and you can actually correlate that to the catalog. This particular riv nut has a grip range of 080 to 140, and it has one radial mark on the head. Alright, next what we're going to do is we're going to determine our material thickness. So I'm going to use my dial calipers. I'm going to go in and I'm going to mic this. And this mic's out at 120. Okay, now that we've determined that the maximum grip of our riv nut is 140 thousandths and our material thickness is 120 thousandths, we're going to subtract our material thickness from the maximum grip of the riv nut, leaving us 20 thousandths. Then we're going to refer to our Infasco pull-up factor chart, and we're going to determine that the stroke required to set this particular riv nut is 115 thousandths. Okay, the next step in setting our stroke correctly is to go ahead and put our calipers on the riv nut. we're going to measure the overall length, which measures 675, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to subtract the stroke that we figured, which is 115 thousandths, which means that I want this riv nut to collapse to 0.560, and that means the riv nut is set correctly in 120 thousandths thick material. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and collapse our riv nut to see what the tool stroke is set at. So I start my first thread, push that down, pull the trigger, reverse it out. I'm going to take my dial calipers, I'm going to measure, it's at 622, and I'm looking to be at 0.560. So I have to go ahead and make my adjustment. I'm going to turn my silver adjusting ring in the plus direction to increase the stroke. I'm going to cycle the tool. Okay, now that I've made the stroke adjustment on the tool here, I'm going to see what it's set for. I'm going to thread my riv nut on. I'm going to collapse it by pushing the top trigger. I'm going to reverse it out. I'm going to take my dial calipers. I'm going to measure the collapsed length, and I am at 568, and I want to be at 560, which means that I want to go ahead and just bump up my stroke just a little more for the correct material thickness. Alright, now that we have the tool set correctly, we simply thread our riv nut onto the tool. Take our demo plate in the correct hole size, pull the top trigger, collapse the riv nut, hit the bottom trigger to reverse it out.